The girl was walking towards the train station when she saw a meteor shower. While taking out her phone to take a picture, she accidentally bumped into someone passing by. When the person turned around, they discovered they had identical faces. The story flashed back 12 hours earlier. The girl, Jane Daquan, was 29 years old, but she was struggling financially and still living in a rented apartment. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend, who even took the shampoo bottle with him when he left. She didn't wish for anything grand, just a small spark of joy on her birthday. The scene shifted to her workplace. While reviewing a report, Jane Daquan discovered that Guan Jijin had embezzled company property. This Guan Jijin was her ex-boyfriend, and they had broken up 3 months ago. Afraid that clients might find out, Jane Daquan reported the matter to her boss, Wang. However, Anna, another colleague, suggested that Jane Daquan was having difficulties both at work and in her personal life and advised her to switch departments. As she was leaving work, she bumped into Lao Yan, her friend who had traveled thousands of miles to see her, making her squeal with delight. Milan was also waiting downstairs because they knew it was her birthday. At the same time, Guanji and her boss, Wang, were having dinner together. Guanji mentioned how Jane Daquan had reported him to Anna, and he vowed to take care of the situation. Meanwhile, Milan asked about her boyfriend, and Jane Daquan hid the fact that they had broken up, pretending that everything was fine. Li Tzu, a friend who had a long-standing feud with Jane Daquan due to Guanji, arrived. He brought a gift box containing a stun gun and a pepper spray, perfect for someone like her who was all alone. Meanwhile, Anna questioned Guanji about why he waited so long to break up with Jane Daquan. He claimed that she had been clinging to him and begging him to stay. At the same time, Li Tzu mentioned her boyfriend, Guanji, expressing his doubts about him. This made Jane Daquan uncomfortable, and she excused herself to the bathroom. Li Tzu followed her and brought up their past fight because of Guanji, which had led to her blocking him on social media. Jane Daquan insisted that Guanji had treated her very well. He was currently away on a business trip, but they were inseparable when he was in town. Guanji had even proposed, and they had already started discussing buying a house. Just then, Guanji, who was in the next room, overheard the conversation. Worried that Anna might misunderstand, he rushed out to clarify that he was the one who had dumped her. Jane Daquan was shocked by his audacity, as she was the one who had thrown him out of her apartment. Moreover, the other woman had even used a work transfer as an excuse to get rid of her. Seeing Guanji insult her by calling her a cleany stalker, Li Tzu, angered, smeared the entire birthday cake on his face. Back in the present, Guanji chased after her. Jane Daquan felt ashamed because she had been stubborn and refused to listen to him, leading to this whole mess. Li Tzu, feeling responsible for ruining her cake, bought a new one to make amends. Guanji had moved to Ningzhou for work, and Jane Daquan allowed him to stay by her side for a few years. However, Li Tzu wanted to be with her forever, not just as friends. He had waited for her for 29 years, and he wasn't in a rush. In that moment, Jane Daquan suddenly kissed him. The next morning, they woke up in the same bed at Li Tzu's apartment. Lao Yan called to ask if Li Tzu had gone to see her the previous night. Jane Daquan lied, saying she was in a meeting, and hung up. Shortly after, Lao Yan called Li Tzu, who reassured him that he had safely brought Jane Daquan home, and quickly hung up. Because he had to leave, Lao Yan scheduled a meeting with Jane Daquan. He noticed she was still wearing the same clothes from the night before and questioned her. She lied again, claiming she was in a hurry. Lao Yan was going overseas to get married and told her to find someone who truly cared for her. Jane Daquan returned home and received a call from her mother. When she told her about breaking up with her boyfriend, her mother expressed joy and encouraged her to give Li Tzu a chance. She also revealed that she would be remarrying the following month. Jane Daquan declined, claiming she was too busy. Her mother became tearful and accused her of being heartless, worrying that the neighbors would gossip behind her back. Feeling overwhelmed, Jane Daquan lashed out at her mother for leaving the family immediately after the divorce. When her father passed away, she didn't see her mother's shadow either. Since he was gone, she no longer had a home to return to. Li Tzu called, but Jane Daquan didn't pick up. Meanwhile, Guanji came looking for her, accusing her of reporting him for taking kickbacks even though they had broken up. He claimed that was a minor issue, and the real problem was that he wanted his rent money back. They had both paid half of the rent for 3 months, but Guanji insisted he had only stayed for half a month. Jane Daquan sighed, returned the money to him, and kicked him out. The next morning, Jane Daquan received news that her old house was being demolished and moved, with a compensation of 2 million yuan. As she was on her way back to her hometown, Li Tzu called. Knowing she was returning to Baihe, he immediately headed there because he had something important to tell her in person. Jane Daquan had already arrived at the Taiyuan station, but suddenly the lights went out. Then, a meteor shower appeared in the sky. She took out her phone to take a picture, and a girl rushed past, accidentally dropping her phone. When the girl turned around, they realized they looked exactly alike. Before they could understand what was happening, a train passed by and the girl disappeared. Jane Daquan thought it was just her imagination, so she continued on her journey. Upon returning to her old house, she was surprised to find the door unlocked and someone living inside. She shouted to ask who was home, and her mother rushed out, scolding her for running away. When her mother grabbed a feather duster to hit Jane Daquan, her father suddenly appeared, making her terrified. Clearly, her father had passed away years ago. The scene shifted, and the whole family went to eat at the house of Zahi. Earlier, he had been angry at his father for driving to Shiyuan, but had gotten into an accident and suffered brain damage, causing him to forget many things. Jane Daquan was about to go visit Zahi when she suddenly remembered the many strange things happening, making her feel like it was all a dream. She pinched herself and pulled her hair to try to wake up, but everyone was confused. Though she was happy to be reunited with everyone in her dream, she had to wake up. Jane Daquan ran to the fish tank and dipped her face in the water. When she raised her head, Zahi was standing before her, and everything was still the same. This time, she thought everyone was playing a prank on her, but realized it didn't make sense because her father was still alive. Hearing this, her father stomped on her foot hard for talking nonsense. Jane Daquan didn't understand what was happening because she and Zahi were still the same age, not time-traveling back to their 18-year-old selves. She asked Zahi what the date was, and he thought she was crazy because people asking that usually had a problem with their minds. However, he couldn't remember because he had just been discharged from the hospital. Zahi pulled out his phone and showed it to Jane Daquan, who discovered it was 3 months earlier. However, even if they went back in time to that point, her father couldn't be alive. Jane Daquan asked Zahi about his failed business venture, but he couldn't remember clearly because his parents told him it was something that happened months ago when he woke up this morning. She thought it was impossible because they were still together yesterday. When Jane Daquan mentioned they had slept together, Zahi immediately denied it and locked her door from the inside. Although Jane Daquan spoke carelessly, she did so very smoothly, leading Zahi to believe that she wasn't mentally ill but had probably been traumatized, hence her current state. After all these events, Jane Daquan realized that the scene at the train station wasn't just an illusion. She had seen a different version of herself. This place wasn't the past, but a parallel world. Everyone had to go out, so Jane Daquan entrusted Zahi with watching over her. She demanded to use the bathroom, and he brought her grandfather's commode. Jane Daquan screamed that she had a real stomachache, and Zahi worried about her safety, so he took her to buy medicine. Inside, she secretly slipped a tube of lubricant into his pocket to cause trouble and escape. Seeing Jane Daquan drive away, Zahi tried to chase after her but was stopped by his aunt, who called the police. Coincidentally, the officer who arrived was Dashi, Zahi's old schoolmate. At that moment, Jane Daquan's mother was at work when she received a call from Dashi at the police station saying that Jane Daquan had stolen Zahi's car. She called her husband, but his phone kept going to voicemail. He was also being held at the police station for drunk driving and brawling. Meanwhile, Jane Daquan was on her way to the Shiyuan station to find a way back, but she was soon found by everyone. Seeing Dashi, she didn't know when he had become a police officer. Therefore, Dashi claimed she was mentally unstable and took her back to the station. As soon as they returned, Jane Daquan was slapped by her mother. She angrily stated she wasn't her daughter, leaving her mother speechless. That night, her father took her out to play to cheer her up. After their disastrous attempt, they went to a bar to drown their sorrows. Sitting beside her father, she suddenly realized how long it had been since she had spent time with him. He couldn't promise her everything, but he could take her out to play for the rest of his life. At that moment, the wound from the fight reopened. Jane Daquan scolded her father for getting into fights with people, but in reality, he was protecting her. During their meal, the people at the table mentioned how Jane Daquan had run away from home because of heartbreak and gossiped about her living with her boyfriend, making her father furious. Jane Daquan told her father that next time something like this happened, he should call her. When they returned home, he mentioned how her words had upset her mother and told Jane Daquan to apologize to her. As they entered, they found her mother making noodles and told her to stay. Jane Daquan was surprised at how delicious her mother's cooking was and felt envious that she didn't have a good mother like hers. Her mother apologized for hitting her in front of everyone earlier and told Jane Daquan to tell her if she was struggling. Looking at the plate of ribs, Jane Daquan remembered the last time their family had eaten together, which was also with ribs before her parents divorced. She couldn't believe she still loved the scumbag Guan Jade in this world. After reading his messages begging for money, she left a message for the girl in this world, warning her about him. The next morning, Jane Daquan woke up to find her mother had drawn a tiger mark on her forehead. An old woman came and stared at her, saying she wasn't Kang Xiaoxin's daughter, which scared Jane Daquan. Then, the woman brewed a potion and forced her to drink it. In a moment of crisis, Jane Daquan declared she was Jane Daquan and that she was completely normal and not rambling. Everyone was busy, so Tui asked Lai Zidi to take Jane Daquan out for a walk, but he refused. However, when his mother said she'd give him 1,000 yuan, he immediately agreed. To her dismay, he took her to a free park. Jane Daquan couldn't understand why Lai Zi had become so obsessed with money. He took her to the love bridge to pray, and seeing Lai Zi, she remembered their time together. Jane Daquan told herself that the Lai Zi in front of her wasn't the one she knew and dragged him to go boating. In a different scene, Mu Zi went to Zahi's school and learned that he hadn't registered for Peking University. After speaking with Zahi, he said he didn't like the school and would try harder to get into his desired one. His father understood his feelings and encouraged him. Meanwhile, Jane Daquan asked Lai Zi about the past, but he had no memory of it after the accident, except for who everyone was. Moreover, his current life was good. If the past was filled with failure and sadness, he would let it go. At the dock, Li Zi climbed out first, leaving her behind because he knew she would steal his keys. He only agreed to pull her up after she agreed to return the keys. He advised her that she was grown up now, and running away from home was just a childish act. He had promised everyone he would watch over her, so he had to take her back safely. After handing her back to Zhang Yingjin, Lai Zi left. Because her mother would be home late, her father took her to a bar. Seeing him protect his daughter so much, Jane Daquan told him to let her grow up on her own, as they couldn't protect her for her entire life. Zhang Yingjin said that as long as he was alive, he would protect her, and even if he died, his spirit would still protect her. This made Jane Daquan emotional, but she was forced to return to Ningxiu. In the other world, her father hadn't been by her side for a long time. Without her parents, she had to grow up quickly and face everything on her own. Jane Daquan wanted to return to Ningxiu because wherever she fell, she had to get back up on her own. Zhang Yingjin didn't know what his daughter had been through, but after finishing his drink, he would take her to the bus station. The last bus to Shiyuan was approaching, so Zhang Yingjin quickly bought her a bag of food. Jane Daquan told her father to cut back on his drinking and stop arguing with her mother before stepping onto the bus. However, her mother arrived and forced her off the bus. While the two were struggling, there was a shout from outside, and her father fainted. After arriving at the hospital, the doctor informed them that Zhang Yingjin had suffered a heart attack and coronary artery blockage, requiring immediate surgery. However, the doctor warned that the risks were high, regardless of whether he underwent surgery or not. Without hesitation, Jane Daquan's mother signed the consent form. Jane Daquan wept uncontrollably, blaming herself, as her father had passed away after surgery in the other world. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the operating room opened, and the doctor announced the surgery had been successful, making her breathe a sigh of relief. Jane Daquan stayed vigil outside the hospital all night. In her dream, she saw her father leave for a distant place. When Zhang Yingjin woke up, Jane Daquan decided not to leave anymore and would stay to make up for the time she had missed. For the following days, she stayed at the hospital to care for him. Lai Zi also frequently visited to help, leading their roommate to believe he was Zhang Yingjin's son-in-law. The scene shifted, and Jane Daquan was overjoyed to see Lao Yan, but he said he had never traveled abroad and had always stayed in Beijing. She realized then that he wasn't the Lao Yan she knew from the other world. Because Zhang Yingjin was about to be discharged, Mu City decided to have them stay at his house for easier care. He wanted Lai Zi and Zahi to share a room to free up one for Jane Daquan. Zahi didn't want to share a room with his brother, so he suggested Lai Zi sleep in the storage room. Their mother decided to sleep in the storage room with her husband, forcing him to agree to share a room with his brother. The next morning, when Lai Zi returned to his room, he found Jane Daquan looking through his photo album. She noticed a photo of him, but not looking at the camera. She asked Lai Zi about it, but he had no memory of it. Seeing a photo taken on the train, Jane Daquan suddenly wanted to go there and dragged Li Zi along because it had been out of service for a long time in the other world. She mentioned that they used to take the train to school in high school, but Lai Zi couldn't remember. Jane Daquan recalled how he had asked her what college she would attend and where she would go. At that time, she jokingly asked Lai Zi if he was trying to confess and told him to go for it, because if he was rejected, he could work harder and improve himself. She believed that after college, they would be like parallel lines and might never see each other again. Despite this, Li Zi gathered the courage to confess, but his words were interrupted by his friend. At the train station, they ran into Lao Yan. He was buying paint to repaint his old house, so Jane Daquan decided to help. Lao Yan felt Li Zi had changed a lot, no longer as reserved and quiet as before, but now smiling more, just like when he was younger. He also saw that Zhang Daquan had changed a lot. When he learned that she was staying with Li Zi, he was a little confused. Zhang Daquan explained that her heater was broken. When she mentioned the rent her father owed Lao Yan, she realized that in this world, Lao Yan owed her family rent. He then brought up their promise from years ago. Back then, Zhang Daquan had wanted them to become a couple instead of friends. Lao Yan said that if she was still single when they turned 30, they would get married. Hearing this, Zhang Daquan was shocked. She hadn't expected this to happen. Lao Yan explained that back then, his family was in a terrible situation and had a lot of debt, so he didn't dare agree. The situation came as such a surprise that she didn't know how to react and asked him for time to reset. Back in her room, she read Zhang Daquan's diary from this world. It was true. In this world, she liked Lao Yan and he liked her. Zhang Daquan didn't know what to do. If she refused, it would mean breaking up a good relationship. If she agreed, it would be like cheating. The scene shifted to the next day. As Zhang Daquan returned home, she saw Yan Jun's stuffing money into her mother's hand. Thinking that Yan Jun's was proposing, she didn't say a word and took back the money. Everyone was shocked when Zhang Daquan said that she didn't want anyone to propose to her. Mu Zili was so surprised that he sprayed food from his mouth onto Zahi's face. After seeing everyone's expressions, Zhang Daquan realized her words were too shocking. But what she didn't expect was Yan Jun's saying that the money was a debt her family had borrowed from Zhang Daquan's family, and they had finally gathered enough to repay it. This made Zhang Daquan incredibly embarrassed and worried that Yan Jun's would actually do something like this in the future. She quickly dragged Yan Jun's outside and explained to him that she had changed completely in this parallel time and space. In fact, her current self and the Zhang Daquan from the parallel world had switched places. Yan Jun's heard this and thought it was the reason Zhang Daquan didn't want to love him, but he didn't get angry at all. He said he would wait for her, which made Zhang Daquan confused and not know how to explain it. Inside the house, everyone speculated that Yan Jun's was attracted to Zhang Daquan. Mu Zili knew Zhang Daquan hadn't eaten anything, so he specifically brought her some fries. However, while sitting there, he started talking nonsense, wanting to ask about Zhang Daquan's gift money. She became so angry that she kicked him out. At the same time, Li Dashi seemed to have something important to tell Yan Jun's. He called him to the police station and spoke to him. Li Dashi said that a man who might be Yan Jun's father was in the hospital. He was being treated for severe burns and might not survive for more than 2 days. Yan Jun's hated his father for ruining his whole family, so he was cold-hearted and ignored it. Even after Li Dashi tried to persuade him, he refused to go. Even when Zhang Daquan and Mu Zili found out, they took the opportunity to help Yan Jun's paint the walls and convince him to see his father one last time so he wouldn't regret it. But Yan Jun's still didn't want to go and left. The scene then shifted to Zhang Daquan's father inviting Yan Jun's to dinner. He wanted to clarify Yan Jun's relationship with Zhang Daquan. During the meal, Zhang Daquan's father advised Yan Jun's not to resent his father. Adults have their own difficulties. But Yan Jun's couldn't help but feel resentment towards his father and worry about his current situation. Zhang Daquan arrived and told her father to go back home so she could talk to Yan Jun's alone. She brought out a photo of her childhood, which included a picture of Yan Jun's father hugging him. Seeing the photo and with Zhang Daquan's persuasion, Yan Jun's finally agreed to go. The next day, Mu Zili drove Yan Jun's and Zhang Daquan to Shiyuan. In front of the hospital room, the police told Yan Jun's that Zhang Hudi was suspected of being a fraudster. Upon hearing this, Yan Jun's became angry and thought that his father not only defrauded people in Baiha, but also defrauded them even after leaving Baiha. Because of this, he didn't want to go in and see his father one last time. Mu Zili was worried that Yan Jun's would miss the chance to see his loved one and tried to persuade him. Zhang Daquan knew how Yan Jun's felt and told him her own story from another time and space. When she confronted her father, who was in debt, and came back to see her after disappearing for years, she chose to be cold and ignore him. As a result, her father died before he could see her one last time. At that time, Zhang Daquan said that she hadn't felt any resentment or anger, but it was just that some things she hadn't had time to ask her father would never be answered, which would be a regret. Hearing this, Yan Jun's stood up and headed towards the emergency room to see his father. Unexpectedly, a police officer ran up to them and said that the person inside was not Zhang Hui, but his ID had been used by a bad person. Yan Jun's was very happy to hear this news. After returning home, Li Zi went to visit Zhang Daquan. He didn't understand why she always rejected him and went home to find out. After seeing the photo he had secretly taken of Zhang Daquan from long ago, Zahi felt increasingly guilty. He asked his younger brother about his past with Zhang Daquan. His brother said that Muesli had confessed his feelings to Jane Daquan back then, but Muesli couldn't believe it. The scene shifted to Jane Daquan going out to play, where she ran into Milan. She learned from others that Milan's life in recent years hadn't been easy and that her father had remarried. This made everyone feel very sad. That evening, Jane Daquan wanted to learn more about her past, so she decided to host a reunion with her classmates. Milan wasn't on the guest list, but Dashi happened to run into her on the street and brought her along. Jane Daquan felt a bit awkward meeting Milan for the first time. They all sat together reminiscing about old times. Muesli, perhaps due to his brain injury, felt that Jane Daquan seemed more natural now, and everyone shared this sentiment about her. Hearing this, Jane Daquan took the initiative to toast with everyone, quickly livening up the atmosphere. However, good times always pass quickly, and soon the party ended. Jane Daquan took Dashi and the others outside, where they ran into Jane Daquan's mother. She knew that Milan and Jane Daquan were close friends in the past, and knowing Milan was currently staying at a hotel after arguing with her father, she invited Milan to live with her daughter. Inside, Milan and Jane Daquan were looking at an old photo album. Not only were there photos of them together, but they both had short hair, which made Jane Daquan curious. Milan was surprised that her friend had forgotten the reason for it, and explained that her father was stubborn and traditional, so he had forced her to cut her hair. Seeing her friend's haircut, Jane Daquan didn't want to see Milan upset, so she cut her hair the same way. While they were talking, Tui brought Milan a brand new set of pajamas and hoped she could stay there comfortably until she got settled. However, Milan felt that living outside all day would become a problem, so she decided to go home tomorrow and asked Jane Daquan to tell Tui for her. The scene shifted to the next day, when Milan packed her bags and left early in the morning. Tui gave Jane Daquan's mother a set of skincare products. When she tried them, Xiaokan noticed a large gold bracelet on Tui's wrist, which she knew her husband had given her. This made Xiaokan feel very envious, and when she returned to her room, she intentionally mentioned it to her husband, hoping he would also buy her one. Unfortunately, Jane Hingjin was focused on studying lottery tickets and wasn't paying much attention. Seeing this, Xiaokan became a little angry. Thinking that living in someone else's house wasn't right, she urged her husband to go home and fix the boiler, saying they would move back tonight. After Zhang Yingjin had someone fix the boiler, he got so caught up in watching the lottery that he forgot he was boiling water. And to make matters worse, he won the lottery that day, so he excitedly ran outside without thinking. At the same time, Xiaokan and Zhang Daquan were having dinner at Chui's house when a fire truck drove by. Soon after, an acquaintance came over and told Xiaokan that her house was on fire. Xiaokan was terrified and rushed to see with Zhang Daquan. She was worried that her husband was inside and wanted to barge in, but the firefighters stopped her. When the scene was chaotic, Jane Yingzhen went back home looking confused. When Xiaokan saw her husband go to drink again, even after their house had burned down, she became so angry that she chased after him, wanting to tear him apart. Xiaokan was tortured by her disappointing life and wanted to divorce Jane Yingzhen. Jane Daquan was very unhappy about her parents' situation. She was worried that this would happen again in another time and space. Her parents would divorce, and they would never communicate with each other. Seeing Jane Daquan sitting outside, Muesli took out fireworks made by his factory and enlightened her, saying that she was someone who could change her destiny. He then believed that she could definitely change things for the better. Inspired by this, Jane Daquan regained her confidence and went to find her father, who was drinking to relieve his sorrows. Sitting there, Jane Daquan tried to reason with her father and hoped that her parents could find common ground. She happened to notice the date on the bottle of alcohol and realized that it was Xiaokan's birthday. Realizing this, Jane Yingzhen immediately went to prepare a birthday gift. When Kang Xiaoshan went back to her bedroom, Jane Yingzhen was pretending to be asleep on the bed, with a gift beside him. Xiaokan opened it and saw a pair of gloves, which made her very happy. Outside, Jane Daquan set off fireworks in the yard and wished her mother a happy birthday, which touched her deeply. This helped them overcome their crisis. The scene shifted to Jane Daquan visiting Milan's home, where she learned that Uncle Mi and Aunt Liu had been married for 3 or 4 years. Aunt Liu warmly welcomed Jane Daquan and offered her a place to stay. Uncle Mi personally cooked a whole meal and then praised Jane Daquan's future and her college acceptance, but he didn't say anything good about Milan, his daughter. Seeing the tension, Jane Daquan knew that Milan hadn't been home for several years, so her room and bed were filled with books, leaving no space to sleep. She invited Milan to stay at her place. Milan knew that her father looked down on her for constantly causing trouble for others, so she was even less willing to stay there and packed her bags, leaving with Jane Daquan. On the way, Milan asked Jane Daquan to help her look for a place to live. The next day, they went together to look for an apartment for Milan. As they strolled around the area, they noticed that the shops they had frequented during high school had been replaced, which made them both sigh. Later, Dashi invited them all to dinner, claiming it was for his son's birthday. This surprised Jang Daquan and the others, as they never knew he had a child. Sitting there, Jang Daquan asked Yan Juns for help finding a job at the Meteorological Bureau, but unfortunately, they were fully staffed. Yan Juns accidentally mentioned a rumor that the old town was about to be demolished. Jang Daquan immediately thought this was an opportunity to make money and ran back to ask her mother for an investment. She hoped that her mother would buy some shops in the old town. However, Kang Xiaokan had long since seen through the business nature of her husband and daughter, so she didn't give it much thought. She said directly that she wouldn't let others take over the family's money, especially their spending. But Jang Daquan didn't give up. She and Milan stayed up late that night researching different types of investments to find capital. Feeling hungry, Milan went out to get food. At the same time, Zahi was walking out to get some water when he saw a figure in front of the refrigerator. He couldn't believe it was Milan, the girl he had been secretly in love with for a long time. Seeing Zahi there, Milan said she was hungry and was making food, and then offered to make some for Zahi, making him flustered. He stood aside, watching Milan cook, feeling warm inside. Unfortunately, Milan got burned by the boiling water. Zahi quickly grabbed her hand and put it under the faucet. Milan looked at Zahi holding her hand tightly and gazed at her younger brother with a different kind of look. The next morning, Jang Daquan thought about buying a shop and was obsessed with the idea. She found a very valuable plate belonging to Xiaokan and thought it was an antique from a previous dynasty, so she wanted to sell it for a good price. Unexpectedly, she tripped and the plate flew out. Luckily, Musili was there to catch it. However, after seeing the words suitable for microwave use on the plate, Jang Daquan's dream was shattered. She thought of another idea and put her piano up for sale. But when the person came to her house to look at the piano, Jang Yingjin happened to come home. Seeing this, he was furious and of course, would not let Jang Daquan sell it. Returning to her room, Jang Daquan was angry about her father's behavior earlier. However, after her mother told her that her father had sold his favorite motorcycle to buy her a piano, Jang Daquan felt very heartbroken and guilty. Jang Daquan recalled how her father had sold his beloved motorcycle to buy her a piano, making her feel even guiltier. Returning home, Jang Daquan saw her father drowning his sorrows in alcohol. Walking over to him, she apologized and promised Jang Yingjin that she would never have any intention of selling the piano again. This made him smile and happily get some snacks and take a few sips. Jang Daquan sat down and picked up the video recorder Jang Yingjin had placed on the sofa. The song playing in it was from the day she bought the piano, and she looked very happy. Jang Daquan made a deal with her father. If he went to the youth palace tomorrow, she wouldn't tell her mother about his secret drinking. After persuading him, he agreed. The next day, Jang Yingjin picked up his piano again, and his smooth, beautiful voice rang out, making everyone gasp in amazement. The auditions at the children's palace began. Jang Yingjin was very nervous and wanted to leave. When Jang Daquan noticed, she told her father that the other contestants on the scene were young and inexperienced. Soon after, Musili saw that the atmosphere between the father and daughter was a little tense, so he quickly signaled to Jang Daquan that he would take good care of her father for her. Then, taking advantage of the situation in the bathroom, Musili had the opportunity to tell Jang Yingjin that Jang Daquan admired him a lot, and what she admired most was how he played the organ. Hearing this, Jang Yingjin was so excited that he immediately went back to participate in the competition and won applause from everyone with his outstanding performance. Jang Yingjin thought this job would definitely be stable and happily described the scene at home. But he didn't expect that although the director of the children's palace had called him and confirmed his abilities, he cleverly said that younger people should be given more opportunities. Jang Yingjin was a kind person, so he naturally followed the wishes of others and didn't try to do anything. Xiaokan became so angry that she almost tore the thread she was winding. Jang Daquan didn't know what to do, so she could only comfort her father. The next day, she went to see the shop owner to discuss the deal, but she didn't have enough money, so she asked the owner for a few more days. Musili chased after them and complained to the owner about the useless store, which made the owner so angry that he almost didn't give Jang Daquan any more time. Jang Daquan managed to persuade him, and they agreed to give her 1 day of grace. That evening, Milan was unhappy about the events of the day. Zahi came out and guessed that she had argued with her father. He gave Milan some advice, saying that the most important thing was to be herself. If not, she would sooner or later disappear like the invisible Rubik's Cube blocks in the game. Milan realized that what she had been avoiding all along was that she didn't want to continue studying according to her father's wishes. Returning to her room, Milan told Zhang Daquan that she wanted to quit her job and invest all her savings in Zhang Daquan's store. Hearing this, Zhang Daquan was so happy that she scheduled a meeting with the shop owner to sign the contract the next day. However, they waited for 3 hours, but Milan still didn't arrive. It turned out that Milan had encountered a problem. Her former roommate came to her for help, but Milan wanted to cut off her past and start a new life. Unfortunately, this friend, Dahua, had become dependent on her. Worried that everyone would find out about her past, Milan had to help Dahua and agreed to meet Zhang Daquan, which meant she couldn't lend her the money for the investment. After Zhang Daquan learned that Milan had lent all her money to Dahua, she was very understanding. She and Milan went to see Dahua at the hotel, staying up all night. Then, they broke up with Dahua together. Milan even became open with her, demanding that Dahua find a job and work hard, and she would lend her all the money she needed. There was no other way than to return to school and work honestly. Zhang Daquan couldn't help but feel a little discouraged when she thought that she still couldn't buy the shop. When she got home, she happened to run into Zhang Yingjin getting ready to go out. But to her surprise, Zhang Yingjin didn't like the place at all. Mu Zili was cleaning the house when he saw Zhang Daquan. He wanted to go upstairs and intentionally blocked her way with the vacuum cleaner. She had never been soft with Mu Zili, so she simply crumpled the potato chips in her hand and scattered them all over the floor. Mu Zili saw this, was angry but dared not say anything, and could only obediently clean up. Zhang Daquan went back to her room and immediately called Guan Zheng to urge him to return the money. When Guan Zheng answered the phone, he was still trying to coax Zhang Daquan and expressing reluctance. When she demanded that he return the money, Guan Zheng threatened to call the police because she was defrauding him and embezzling his property. Zhang Daquan took advantage of the situation and threatened him, saying that he would have to return the money to her within 2 days, or else he shouldn't blame her. Zhang Daquan was thinking about something in the backyard when Mu Zili poured her a drink. Zhang Daquan didn't appreciate it and suspected that Mu Zili had put poison in the drink. When Mu Zili heard this, he got angry and took a sip to prove his innocence. At that moment, Mu Zili heard and mocked Zhang Daquan for coming back. She got so angry that Zhang Daquan, who was sitting on the swing, suddenly stood up. She lunged towards Mu Zili and they embraced. Both Mu Zili and Zhang Daquan felt a rush of excitement. Zhang Daquan didn't say anything, but went straight into the house. Zhang Yingjin was secretly going through Xiaokan's bag. Zhang Daquan had a bad feeling and quietly followed Zhang Yingjin to the room where he played cards and mahjong. Unexpectedly, Dahua, who was supposed to have left, appeared there that evening. Zhang Daquan told Milan about meeting Dahua. Milan realized something was wrong with Dahua and went to find her, but couldn't find her. Zhang Daquan secretly took Zhang Yingjin's clothes while he was asleep. She also found his healthcare products and WeChat chat history inside. Daijai, as soon as he saw the healthcare products, knew that Zhang Yingjin had been tricked and immediately ran to the hotel where he had signed the contract. At that moment, Dahua had tricked Zhang Yingjin into signing the contract. Milan rushed over to stop her. Unexpectedly, when Zhang Yingjin saw her, he was relieved and gave Milan the money without saying a word. Zhang Daquan arrived just in time and looked at this scene in disbelief. As for Dahua, Li Dashi happened to run into her as she was secretly leaving. Daiji took Dahua and Milan back to the police station for questioning. Confronted with the evidence, Dahua finally admitted that she had committed fraud. But Milan was completely innocent in this matter. Upon receiving the information, Uncle Mei rushed to the police station and slapped Milan, embarrassed by what she had done. Zhang Daquan thought that Milan was involved in deceiving Zhang Yingjin and had a problem with her. Milan grabbed her luggage and left that night. Fortunately, there were no other cars at the station, so she had to take a black car. Mu Zili saw Milan get in the black car but couldn't call her. When Zhang Daquan learned about this, she was very worried and immediately asked Mu Zili to drive out to find her. Therefore, a group of 4 people in the car chased after her on the road and stopped Milan. They discovered that Milan was not on the car, which made them all quite frightened. Milan noticed a problem with the black car driver's watch and insisted on getting out of the car halfway. But there were no villages in front of her and no shops behind her, and her mobile phone wasn't working, so she could only stand on the roadside platform and wait. Mu Zili drove to look for Milan. Milan's eyes were red when she saw that everyone cared about her. They ran out of gas, so they had to stay at Milan's grandmother's house. They were dissatisfied, so all 5 of them slept on one bed that night. Milan lay on the bed and recounted her various jobs over the past few years, the longest being live streaming. Initially, Milan wasn't very popular in the live streaming company. The boss had planned for her to take a sexy route, but Milan didn't agree, so she switched to mukbang every day, eating and then throwing up. Those days were very painful for her. Later, they slowly started selling healthcare products until they were detained. Milan decided to leave her past behind and return to Baiha, the happiest days she had before meeting Jane Daquan. Everyone who heard her story was silent, not knowing what to say, but they all understood that Milan had had a difficult time. The next morning, Milan packed her bags and tried to leave secretly, but her grandmother blocked her at the door. She told her that she had spoken to Milihua on the phone. Her grandmother recounted that Milan's mother had died young, but lived a life full of storms. Her grandmother hoped that Milan could stand tall and not care about the past. In her grandmother's eyes, Milan was a continuation of her daughter. As long as Milan was good, her mother would be fine. She wanted Milan to remember that her mother always protected her in all the big things. After hearing her grandmother's words, Milan couldn't help but cry and run away. After breakfast, some people were thinking about how to get back, but they were surprised to see an announcement that the night before there had been heavy snowfall, making it impossible to return. They had to stay at her grandmother's house for another day. Her grandmother ordered everyone to work. Yan Juns was assigned to follow her selling lunchboxes. Jane Daquan and Muzili went to catch geese, while Muzi and Milan went to clear the snow. Neither Jane Daquan nor Muzili had ever caught a goose. After a lot of effort, not only did they fail to catch the goose, but they were chased by it, and Jane Daquan even sprained her ankle. Muzili carried her back home and then quickly ran to the medical center to buy medicine. When he returned, he happened to see Yan Juns applying ice to Jane Daquan's foot. He felt a little unhappy inside. Her grandmother planned to take everyone ice fishing. When Jane Daquan heard this, she was immediately excited. She put on her shoes and got ready to go. There were a lot of things to take for ice fishing. Her grandmother pulled a tricycle, and the boy couldn't fit in, so he had to walk and push the cart. It took more than 20 minutes to get there, and many people were exhausted. Muzili wanted to quickly go back, but then, under her grandmother's arrangement, they dug an ice cave and built a tent. Everything was ready. Her grandmother sat on the chair to ice fish, but after a while, she didn't catch anything. Muzili and Jane Daquan kept asking uncomfortable questions, making her grandmother angry, so she chased them out to play. Only Yan Juns stayed to ice fish with her. Her grandmother, who was 70 years old, thought she had fiery eyes and decided that Yan Juns would be the one to care for Milan. She didn't give Yan Juns a chance to explain and recounted Milan's life from when she was a child. On the ice, Muzili found a tire and pulled Jane Daquan, running wildly across the ice, making Jane Daquan scream with joy. Soon, Muzili got tired, so he asked Jane Daquan to pull him. Unexpectedly, Jane Daquan couldn't pull him, so he fell directly onto the ice. At that moment, he saw a small red fish inside. Jane Daquan childishly slapped the ice and saw the small red fish, which she thought was swimming, and laughed happily. This made Muzili particularly curious. The aroma of the cooked fish made many people hungry, but her grandmother only gave chopsticks to Yan Juns, who was working. Jane Daquan quickly flattered him, and the sweetness on her lips made his grandmother feel at ease. So everyone started to eat happily. The next day, they were planning to return to Baiha. Jane Daquan had secretly taken a large plate of snacks from her grandmother's kitchen and taken it out to eat at midnight. They were playing cards and planning to have a party, but because they were afraid of being caught, they obediently went to bed. When Muzili woke up in the middle of the night, he noticed that the bed in front of Jane Daquan was moving. He opened it and saw Jane Daquan hiding and eating. She opened her eyes wide and wanted to share some of it with him. Muzili felt his heart racing again, quickly said he needed to go to the bathroom, and left the room. After returning to Baiha, Milan made a special trip to apologize to Jane Yingjin, and he forgave her. Jane Daquan accidentally learned that the shop in the old town was still for sale, so she encouraged Muzili, and with the support of his family, they invested in the shop. Jane Daquan called the shop owner, but the person on the other end immediately hung up after hearing her voice. Jane Daquan thought the food wasn't bad. Muzili pondered and came up with an idea. The shop owner was negotiating with customers who were interested in the shop. Jane Daquan arrived and said that she had money and could sign the contract right away. However, the owner didn't want to sell and said directly that someone was coming to buy his shop and ignored her. At that moment, Muzili walked in and used peculiar words to comment that the shop was simply a low-yield asset and that this silly Jane Daquan wanted to buy it. Those who were looking at the shop heard this and felt that it was right and left immediately. The shop owner became so angry that he wanted to fight. Jane Daquan once again showed her sincerity, but the shop owner was also worried that he would lose his shop, so he reluctantly lowered the price. Finally, Jane Daquan got the shop she wanted. Jane Daquan hoped to make a lot of money right after the shop was demolished, but Yan Juns brought news that although the old street was being demolished, this shop was not being included. Zhang Daquan heard this and nearly fainted. Everyone quickly pinched her. Mu Zili checked the shop and thought that the kitchen was still usable, so he suggested opening a restaurant directly. Zhang Daquan thought it was a good idea and invited everyone to help clean up. She also thought about separating the sunroom from the staff dormitory. Mu Zili reminded Zhang Daquan that the budget wasn't enough. Yan Jun's immediately said that he would pay for the sunroom, which excited Zhang Daquan so much that she hugged Yan Jun's tightly. That evening, Zhang Daquan, who had been busy all day, invited a few good friends to warm the house with a lively meal. Suddenly, someone asked who knew how to cook. This made some people realize that no one knew how to cook. They looked at each other and felt that they were going to go bankrupt soon, so they said in advance that they couldn't borrow money from Dai Shai. When Zhang Daquan and Mu Zili returned home, the sky was full of stars. Zhang Daquan hadn't seen so many stars in a long time, so she invited Mu Zili to sit in the yard for a while. Mu Zili felt cold, so he split his scarf in half and gave it to Zhang Daquan. They named the shop Mu Zili, hoping it would be a popular restaurant. After many days of work, the shop had a new look and the restaurant sign was hung up. Zhang Daquan had to feed everyone the dish she cooked today. Unexpectedly, the pressure cooker exploded as soon as it was put on the stove. Mu Zili rushed in and checked the pressure cooker first, which made Zhang Daquan feel uncomfortable because she was no more valuable than the pressure cooker. On this day, Mu Zili met Guan Zheng, who went to see Zhang Daquan on the road. He was worried that Zhang Daquan would be seduced by a few sweet words, so he conspired with Milan and Yan Jun's and deliberately took Zhang Daquan to buy tables and chairs. Although Zhang Daquan felt that Mu Zili was a little strange today, she didn't think much about it when she went to the furniture store. She directly ordered tables and chairs and then wanted to buy a sofa. Mu Zili said that the budget was limited and they couldn't buy it randomly, but Zhang Daquan really liked it. Hearing the two arguing, the shop owner came over to persuade Mu Zili that if he bought a sofa, the relationship between neighbors could be upgraded. On the way back, the car driven by Mu Zili broke down, making Zhang Daquan feel that she was easy to transport. After all, whenever she went out with him, something would go wrong. Mu Zili had no choice but to call a tow truck. Unexpectedly, the tow truck also broke down on the road, so they had to spend the night at a nearby gas station. The next day, when Mu Zili got home, he sneezed. Zhang Daquan reached out to check his forehead temperature, but he dodged. After Mu Zili returned to his room, he remembered Zhang Daquan saying at the gas station that she had a boyfriend and would definitely find him. This made him feel uncomfortable. Zhang Daquan felt uncomfortable as well. Mu Zili was clearly right in front of him, but he wasn't the Mu Zili from the parallel time and space. The restaurant was ready and officially opened the next day. Zhang Daquan specially invited everyone to have a meal at the restaurant. Yan Jun's gave the shop a set of water glasses. On this day, Milan was working as an accountant in the shop and discovered that in the 2 days since the shop opened, only Zhang Yinzhen had ordered a dish and he still owed money. This made some people feel that their future was bleak and they couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Mu Zili believed that this situation couldn't continue and suggested that Zhang Daquan and Milan hand out flyers and advertise. At this time, a migrant worker walked in and asked if they had food. Zhang Daquan agreed, so she went outside to greet her teammates. More than a dozen people came to cheer them on. The restaurant sold Western food. When the migrant workers discovered this, they felt it wasn't suitable and wanted to leave. To keep the customers, Mu Zili said he could cook. The three of them cooperated to cook dishes in the kitchen. The result was that the fish-flavored minced pork was made into green pepper minced pork and potatoes, which was not the requested dish. Zhang Daquan was about to go out to get some of the worst discounts, but she unexpectedly bumped into Mu Zili, and both of them dropped the vegetables in their hands. In the kitchen, everyone saw the food on the floor and was very worried. After reading the menu, he directly asked them to order. This saved the entire restaurant. The migrant workers were very satisfied with the meal today, but they thought the food was served too slowly. Today's order was considered a loss. When Zhang Daquan and Mu Zili saw the customers off, Guan Zheng arrived at the door. Mu Zili didn't want Guan Zheng to enter, but Zhang Daquan wanted him to return the money and brought him into the restaurant. Guan Zheng sat down and ordered food. Mu Zili didn't want to greet him, but Zhang Daquan felt that they couldn't make money without customers, so she arranged for him to go into the kitchen to cook when she learned that they didn't have enough plates. She rolled her eyes and asked Guan Zheng to help wash dishes and clean up. Mu Zili saw that Guan Zheng was about to enter the kitchen and stopped him, but Zhang Daquan told him to get out of the way. As soon as Guan Zheng put on his apron, Zhang Yinzhen came downstairs. When he learned it was Guan Zheng, he immediately rushed over and beat him, wanting Guan Zheng to return the money to Zhang Daquan. Zhang Daquan asked Guan Zheng to stay and finish his work before letting him leave. Guan Zhang kept saying sweet nothings and wanted to get back together with Zhang Daquan. She didn't agree but didn't directly ignore him. Instead, she added him to WeChat. This made the three men behind watching her through the window very unhappy. Zhang Daquan explained that she really wasn't going to have anything to do with Guan Zhang anymore and just wanted him to return the money. Unexpectedly, Guan Zhang's message arrived just in time, saying that he cared about her. Seeing this, the three men left in anger. After Zhang Daquan's old house was burned down by Zhang Yinzhen, it was never repaired. This time, she learned that Guan Zhang had been reported, and they broke off her relationship with him and fired Guan Zhang. Guan Zhang came to Baiha to find her, came up with a plan, and invited Milan to act with him. Zhang Daquan invited Guan Zhang to live in her house and then asked him to help repair the house. Guan Zhang couldn't refuse, so he had to start working according to Zhang Yinzhen and Zhang Daquan's request. After working for several days, he finally finished the house repairs. Guan Zhang thought that Zhang Daquan had left him just to get back together. Now that the house was repaired, they could take things further. He sent hints to Zhang Daquan. Zhang Daquan told him to go to the shop. That night, the shop was empty. When Guan Zhang thought that he could make a lot of money by destroying Zhang Daquan's shop, he was overjoyed and constantly sent flirtatious signals to Zhang Daquan while they were eating. Mu Zili happened to be outside the shop window and saw Guan Zhang holding Zhang Daquan's hand. This made him very angry. When he turned around, he saw Milan carrying Guan Zhang's luggage. Realizing that something was wrong with Zhang Daquan, he quickly returned to the restaurant. He happened to see Guan Zhang getting angry and trying to force himself on Zhang Daquan. He immediately rushed over to beat up Guan Zhang. Guan Zhang knew that Zhang Daquan had made him work for many days just to pay off her debt. He was very angry when Zhang Daquan told him about her current situation. He became even more angry and wanted to live with her. Mu Zili bandaged Zhang Daquan's wounds. He knew that she was worried about her parents' divorce and was determined to help her run the shop well. On the way back, Zhang Daquan was drunk and told Yan Zhens that she would soon disappear from here to the parallel world and that she didn't belong with Liao Yan. Knowing that Zhang Daquan was drunk, he didn't pay much attention to what she said. He only hoped that Zhang Daquan would change her mind about him in the future. The next day, she and her mother went to the supermarket together. At that moment, she received a call from her mother in the city. The beauty salon was doing very well, and she wanted her mother to come and help her. Zhang Daquan tried to stop her mother from going, but she refused to listen. A while later, she returned home because the shop was doing very poorly and she hadn't found a solution. Seeing his daughter struggling, her father had the idea of inviting customers to help. However, Zhang Daquan didn't trust him very much because he was so obsessed with gambling, and she didn't know if he would really help. At that time, Li Zi, Milan, and Zhang Daquan were waiting at the restaurant with bated breath, but no one came. Just then, her father came back with a group of tourists to the restaurant to enjoy the food. Everyone praised the food, saying it was very delicious and to their liking. But when it came time to pay, starting with the customers to the tour guide, they started playing tricks. They argued about who wouldn't pay, leading to a scuffle and a fight. This forced them to go to the hospital, leaving the trio standing there dumbfounded because they had no money to pay. That evening, everyone was as gloomy as they had ever been. They recounted what had happened to Yan Zhens and Dai Jai. Seeing this, the two tried to make Zhang Daquan and the others laugh, but their faces were still as gloomy as if they were at a funeral. That night, when Zhang Daquan returned home, she was still sad. Seeing this, her friend came over and handed her a book about love psychology. She still pretended not to care about love to get Milan to leave. The next morning, Zhang Daquan took out the book to see what it was about. Li Zi came in from behind, giving her a fright. Zhang Daquan was both angry and embarrassed, and argued with Li Zi for a while because he entered her house as if he owned it. She then ran directly to her room. Li Zi saw this and went in to apologize to Zhang Daquan, but she was now hot-tempered like ice cream and didn't listen to anything he said. She immediately chased him out. Over on the other side, Milan was having a meal with her family. But because her father was very strict and patriarchal with his children, he kept repeating his desire for Milan to open a shop. Hearing this, she didn't seem happy because it was her hard work and he didn't acknowledge it at all. At the same time, Zhang Daquan's family was also having a meal together at home. There, her uncle and aunt kept trying to match her with Li Zi, which made him very embarrassed. But because of the scarf that Milan had given Li Zi before, she was still a little jealous. Seeing this, a while later, he took the scarf and confirmed with Milan, and it was true that the two of them had gone on a date once, but it was only for one day. Her purpose in helping him was to save him some face in front of his friends. Hearing this, Li Zi breathed a sigh of relief. Thankfully, it wasn't real love. The next morning, he woke up in a gloomy mood because he had to move to a different place today. Zahi recalled his fond memories with Zhang Daquan when they had been happy teasing each other here. That evening, he decided to bring the movie ticket that his father had given him to ask Zhang Daquan to watch a movie with him. Fortunately, she immediately agreed. It seemed like their feelings were developing well. A while later, when they returned, Zahi told Zhang Daquan about the misunderstanding with Milan and the scarf. She had already learned about it from her friend, which made Zahi very happy because he had been cleared of suspicion. The next morning, because the shop was doing poorly, Zhang Daquan called all the shareholders together for a meeting to discuss solutions. But to everyone's dismay, they all had different ideas, and it was all a headache. The next day, the group tried their best dishes to see how they would sell. However, after cooking, everyone tried a bit, and they couldn't understand how the dishes were either too salty or too hard. They couldn't eat them. A while later, Zahi went to the restaurant to find Milan. At that moment, he felt very hungry and wanted her to cook something for him to eat. The two of them sat together and chatted happily. Zahi kept asking Milan what her dreams were for the future, but she didn't have any dreams at the moment. She just wanted to stay peacefully at the restaurant. Seeing this, Zahi advised her to live with more dreams and goals so that she would have new opportunities to open up in the future. The next morning, everyone got together to clean the restaurant, but Zahi arrived late and saw Yan Jun's holding Zhang Daquan's hand, making him very jealous. Over on the other side, Zahi submitted a letter to drop out of his art class to pursue his dream of painting. No matter how much his teacher advised him, he was determined to quit. Seeing that there was no other way, his teacher had to go to his house to see his parents. The two of them didn't understand why their son was doing this. That evening, the whole family was waiting for Zahi to come back to talk. Even after his parents and brother tried everything they could, he was still determined to quit college and pursue his dream of painting. The next morning, Zahi went to the restaurant to invite Milan to go out with him. On the way, he said that he had quit school to follow his dream of painting, even though others had stopped him, but Zahi was still determined to learn. Seeing this, Milan encouraged him to pursue his passion. So they happily went skiing together, forgetting the sad things that had happened before. A while later, when the two of them returned to the restaurant, they saw Uncle Mi waiting there. He constantly scolded his student and daughter. One was obsessed with going out and playing, not taking care of the restaurant, while the other student was refusing to study and was obsessed with painting. What he said made them very sad because it touched their self-esteem. Over on the other side, Zahi showed everyone at home the certificates that Zahi had won in the national painting competition. They were all first place, but his mother still didn't want him to pursue it because he was still studying in college. Just then, Zahi came home and heard everything, and he felt very sad because no one understood him. Seeing this, Zahi also went into his room to encourage him, but the result was the same. Meanwhile, Yan Juns was scrolling through TikTok when he heard someone breaking into his house. When he ran out to see, he found that the person had already escaped. The next morning, Yan Juns immediately reported it to the police to investigate. Currently, the family hadn't lost anything and had even gained some bread and milk. A while later, with his professional skills, Dashi checked the camera and found out that it was Yan Juns' father. On this side, Zahi and his father were at home when they heard that Uncle Zhang Yingjun had been kidnapped by a group of gangsters for debt collection. His father immediately planned to go there to see what was happening, but his heart disease flared up. Seeing this, Zahi immediately changed clothes. He and Liu Zhang arrived just in time. Because the leader was acting inappropriately, a fight broke out between the two sides. Fortunately, Dashi and the police officers arrived and took everyone to the station for questioning. But for some reason, as soon as Yan Juns saw his father, he was filled with hatred and punched him before turning and leaving. A while later, inside the police station, his father tried to apologize to his wife and son for running away and neglecting them for the past 10 years. But Yan Juns didn't care about what he said and considered him dead 10 years ago. Even if he had enough money to pay off his debts now, it wouldn't make a difference. That evening, Milan found a room for her father and Zhang Yingjun to drink. There, Lao Mu and Lao Zhang constantly blamed Zhang Yingjun for abandoning his wife and children in the past. Although they knew that making amends would be difficult now, they could only advise him to try to slowly make amends. Maybe good things would come. The next morning, Uncle Tuan got up early to prepare breakfast for everyone at the restaurant. At first, everyone complained about the dish because it was very elaborate, but after eating it, they all praised it as delicious. Taking advantage of this, Lao Zhang and the others decided to make this dish the main dish at the restaurant to attract customers. The whole group decided to get started because the time had come. After a while of setting up, finally, customers started to come to the restaurant, more and more of them. Everyone praised how delicious it was because the dish was very unique and special. The whole group took turns running around, unable to serve everyone. Meanwhile, Yan Jun's mother and him were chatting. She advised her son to give up his hatred for his father because no matter what, he was the one who gave him life. She wanted Yan Jun's to forget the past and live in the present. After hearing this, he seemed to hate his father a little less. The next morning, Zheng Daquan brought Yan Jun's a new signature dish from the restaurant. He ate it and praised how delicious it was because the flavor was unique and special, but when he heard that his father had made it, he didn't seem to like it. Seeing this, Zheng Daquan advised him to be open-minded with his father, saying that Lao-san was different now and wasn't like that anymore. He had been trying every day to get back together with his wife and children, so Yan Jun should consider it. That evening, when Zheng Daquan called Zahi to ask him to paint her a picture to hang on the empty wall at the restaurant, her main purpose was to help Zahi earn extra income to pursue his passion, so she paid a very high price for the painting. Hearing this, he immediately agreed because painting was his forte. A few days later, Zahi brought the paintings that Zheng Daquan had asked him to paint. As soon as she saw them, she was surprised because they were even more beautiful than she had imagined. Li Zi called Yan Jun's to talk. He was going to return to start a business with Zikai, so he wanted to hand over all the upcoming work at the restaurant to Yan Jun's for assistance. He told everyone, except Zheng Daquan. He was waiting for the right opportunity to tell her. Seeing this, Yan Jun's could only wish his friend good luck on the path he had chosen and said that he would take care of everything at the restaurant. That evening, Zheng Daquan's family was together, but unexpectedly, her mother accidentally blurted out that Li Zi was about to leave to start a business. Hearing this, she immediately ran to find Li Zi to ask for an explanation. But this time, it was a little difficult, as he had already decided to leave for a while. The next morning, Zheng Daquan heard from Milan that Li Zi would leave in 2 days, which made her very sad. But they were in parallel worlds, so she only considered Li Zi a friend. Seeing how her friend felt, Milan advised her that no matter where or how, as long as they had feelings for each other, they could still love each other. Hearing this, Zheng Daquan felt more motivated. A while later, the group decided to go hiking, but because Zheng Daquan and Li Zi didn't want to go, they made up an excuse of having a stomachache and stayed at home to play with Shamai. Meanwhile, the others successfully climbed the mountain, and everyone was happy because they had a day to go out and enjoy the scenery together. Taking advantage of this, Li Daji told Yan Jun's that Niu was not his biological child. He told the story of how he had a car accident on the highway. Although the car was destroyed, he was lucky to be alright. When Li Daji slowly returned, he saw an abandoned baby and immediately took him in. From that day on, he adopted the boy. That evening, after everyone had returned from their outing, they all got together for a drink. Taking advantage of this, Li Zi said he would resign from the restaurant to give the job to Yan Jun's, hoping that the restaurant would become even more successful in the future. Everyone was very sad to hear this, but they could only wish Li Zi a safe journey. The next day, Zheng Daquan kept thinking about Li Zi and felt too sad to do any work. She suddenly remembered a gift he had given her before, but she couldn't find it in her wallet. Zheng Daquan immediately asked everyone and searched everywhere, even asking Yan Jun's to help find it, but it was still nowhere to be found. The next morning, the day Li Zi was going to leave to start his business, Zheng Daquan felt too sad to see him off. But with Milan's advice, she thought again. On the other side, Li Zi was alone, waiting for his flight. No one came to see him off. Just then, Yan Jun's came over and handed him a gift he had given Zheng Daquan the previous day. Yan Jun's recounted what had happened the previous day. She had lost the gift and searched for it all night. Seeing this, he immediately took the gift and went to find Zheng Daquan. It turned out that Niu had picked up the gift the night before. Yan Jun's asked for it back and then gave it to Li Zi. On this side, the two called each other to arrange to meet. But on the way, due to the icy road, Li Zi had an accident. A while later, he was taken to the hospital. Although his injuries were not life-threatening, he was currently in a deep coma. Seeing this, Zheng Daquan also rushed to the hospital and waited anxiously outside, hoping that nothing would happen. It wasn't until the next morning that Li Zi woke up. Everyone was happy that he was alright. Zheng Daquan asked Li Zi what he wanted to tell her yesterday, but he said that he had forgotten. Then he asked Zheng Daquan to go back to rest. He wanted to be alone. The scene of the car accident appeared in Li Zi's mind. He wanted to find out if it was the car accident on the road back to Baiha, so he asked Zahi about the situation and learned that it was a car accident on the road leaving Baiha. This was very different from Li Zi's memory. He really needed to find out the truth, so he went to the police station to view the surveillance footage of the entire road where the incident occurred. Based on the situation at the scene and the nearby surveillance, the police determined that at the time of the accident, only Li Zi's car was involved. Although there were many suspicious signs of the collision, there was no explanation unless the other car disappeared into thin air. When Zahi returned home, he learned that his mother had almost fainted because of what had happened to him. He decided not to go out, but instead to find his old mobile phone. Zahi kept thinking about the scene of the car accident, suddenly remembering that the car that collided with him was his own. He started searching for information on the internet. He learned about the theory of parallel universes, many of which did not match his previous memories. He was 90% sure that he had traveled through time. He couldn't face Jane Daquan, who had been physically intimate with him, so he always deliberately avoided her. This made Jane Daquan very troubled because she always had to pay the price for her mistakes and couldn't focus on her work. Zahi wanted to see Milan, so he painted a few more pictures and brought them to the restaurant. Milan accidentally revealed that Zahi had bought the painting. This made Zahi very disappointed. He felt that his painting wasn't beautiful. He didn't want to owe Zahi any favors and wanted to return the money to him. On the other side, Zahi was once obsessed with starting a business, but now when his partner called, he refused. This made Zahi a little confused. Zahi explained to Zahi that he came from a different time and space, but Zahi didn't believe him and thought he was mentally ill. Jane Daquan and everyone else went to see the ice sculpture festival. Everyone was there, but Zahi wasn't, so Jane Daquan went to Zahi's door and called him, urging him to go see the ice sculptures with her. But Zahi was still flustered at that moment. He stood by the window and saw Jane Daquan standing at the door. He was worried that she would freeze outside and told her to find a warm place to sit. Jane Daquan realized that Zahi had seen her and asked him to come down and talk to her. Zahi hung up and went down the stairs, but when he passed his father's room, he heard an unpleasant sound of vomiting from his father. Zahi hugged his father tightly and learned that his health was very poor. This made Zahi's heart ache. Jane Daquan had been waiting for Zahi for a long time downstairs. Just then, Yanjuns came over and warmed Jane Daquan's hands. She was a little angry because she thought Zahi wasn't going to come down, so she decided to leave. Meanwhile, Milan and Zahi went to see the ice sculptures together. When she saw the balloon in a child's hand, she remembered that she had wanted it very much when she was young, but her father had refused to buy it for her. Zahi immediately went over and traded his candied hawthorn for the balloon for Milan, which made her very happy. Uncle Mai also went to see the ice sculptures. When he saw Zahi and Milan walking together, he scolded Milan because Zahi was still a student and had to take the college entrance exams. This made him very embarrassed, and he kept scolding his daughter with harsh words, causing her to burst into tears and leave. The next morning, Zahi went to find Uncle Mai to clarify things. Actually, he had been living without a purpose and very dissolute before. It was Milan's appearance that gave him a purpose in life. She had never caused trouble for anyone and always suffered alone. He would never make her feel uncomfortable again. Zahi's words really made Uncle Mai cry. On this side, Zahi went to Jane Daquan's house to help her father repair her computer. Jane Daquan, who had been upset for the past few days, showed a clear attitude of displeasure towards him. Zahi then took the initiative to go to her room and apologize for what happened last night. Zahi told Jane Daquan that he might not be able to come to the shop, often because he had to go to the factory to help his father. Jane Daquan agreed and asked Zahi to tell her about their situation after he returned. Zahi returned the small doll that Jane Daquan had lost to her and reminded her to take good care of it. Milan's grandmother suddenly had someone bring a delivery truck over for them. Milan and Jane Daquan looked at the pile of radishes, eggs, and cabbages. This pile of stuff would probably last them the whole year. Uncle John Hui saw the basket full of eggs and cooked 2 authentic dombe dishes for everyone. Jane Daquan and the others had never eaten these dishes before, and they praised his cooking. Yan Jun's favorite dish as a child was this snow pea dish, but today he didn't eat a single bite. To ease the relationship between Yan Jun's and Uncle John Hui, Jane Daquan asked Yan Jun's to go into the kitchen and get some for her. Uncle John Hui was also in the kitchen. He wanted to wrap some for him to eat, but Yan Jun's refused, which made Uncle John Hui very disappointed. That day at the shop, they had to send a package. Uncle Tuanan didn't have his ID card with him, so he took Uncle John Hui's ID card out of the drawer to send the package and discovered that it was fake. Uncle Tuanan was very angry and immediately questioned Uncle John Hui and called Yan Jun's. He insisted on not letting Uncle John Hui explain and immediately took him to the police station. Liu Dashi was really troubled by these 2 father and son. He asked them both to stop and asked Uncle John Hui why he was using a fake ID. It turned out that Uncle John Hui was too old to find a job to earn more money. He had to make a fake ID and change his age to be younger. He had been to Inner Mongolia and Thailand and had traveled most of China. Yan Zheng was worried that the money Uncle Zhonghui brought back wasn't clean, but Uncle Zhonghui immediately insisted that it was all earned through hard work. It seemed that Yan Zheng misunderstood his father again, and his mood was chaotic, so he decided to go for a walk alone. Jane Daquan followed him. Yan Zheng asked solemnly if she could stay with him forever. In his heart, Yan Zheng knew that Jane Daquan could never be his girl, so he turned and left. After Jane Daquan returned home, she read her diary and discovered that whenever she was in a bad mood, they would go ice skating together. Jane Daquan didn't want Yan Zheng to be too sad, so she took the initiative to invite Yan Zheng to go ice skating. On the ice rink, Jane Daquan couldn't skate at all. Yan Zheng remembered that Jane Daquan could skate before, and he was even more sure that this was not the Jane Daquan he knew. Lizzie was also there. The three of them skated together happily. Later, Yan Zheng received a call from his mother and learned that Uncle Zhonghui had gone to his house, so he quickly went back. When Lizzie was alone with Jane Daquan, he said that he had regained his memory and remembered that he had a girlfriend he loved deeply, so he could only be friends with Jane Daquan. Hearing this, Jane Daquan was very sad, her eyes were red, and she made up an excuse to go back because she had work to do at home. As soon as Jane Daquan returned home, she saw packed luggage in the living room and knew that her mother was going to Shenzhen. Jane Daquan asked the reason, but her father didn't say anything. When her mother was about to leave, Jane Daquan tried to stop her. Under her repeated questioning, Jane Daquan's mother revealed that Uncle Tuanan had been cheated out of $600,000. She had tried for all these years, but he didn't help and completely destroyed the house. This made her especially heartbroken, so she decided to leave. On Uncle Zhonghui's birthday, he bought a leg of mutton and went home to make dumplings. During the meal, he saw Lo Son, who had taken care of his wife for so many years, and proposed a divorce, hoping that Yan Zheng's mother could live a more comfortable life. Uncle Tuanan didn't have a serious job and wanted to make money all day long, which made Jane Daquan very worried. She asked him to go out and find a job that suited his musical abilities. On this side, Uncle Muzi's health was poor. When Lai Zi gave him the medicine, he learned from his mouth that Uncle Tuanan was in trouble again. He knew that Uncle Tuanan's mind was completely not in the shop, so he asked someone to find him a job playing the organ and specially asked Lai Zi to tell Jane Daquan this news. The next day, Jane Daquan discovered that Jane Tuanan hadn't come home all night. She quickly called him, but no one answered. Jane Daquan became worried and quickly called around to ask if anyone had seen Jane Tuanan. Then she went to the shop where Jane Tuanan often went to ask for news, and she learned that he had gone to Lin. When Jane Daquan heard the word Lin, she remembered that in the other side of the parallel world, Jane Tuanan had died on a farm in the forest, so she immediately ran there. Lazy Yan Zheng and Li Dashi knew that Jane Daquan had gone to the forest farm to find him, so they rushed to the car. Unfortunately, it was going to snow heavily tonight, but luckily they had a walkie-talkie. Li Dashi was worried that if everyone split up to search, they would get lost or exhausted and stuck in the snow, so he told everyone to gather at the car in an hour. Li Zi followed Jane Daquan's footprints and searched constantly. He shouted at the top of his lungs while looking for her. The sky became darker and darker, indicating that the danger was growing. Fortunately, God was kind, and Lai Zi finally found Jane Daquan. Lai Zi knew that there was a wooden house in the forest farm where Mu Zai and Jane Tuanan had stayed before, so he led Jane Daquan forward. When they arrived at the wooden house, they discovered that there was a fire inside and half-eaten sweet potatoes, but Jane Tuanan was nowhere to be found. Jane Daquan became even more panicked. Fortunately, Li Zi found a row of footprints covered in snow on the snow, so he quickly led Jane Daquan to follow the footprints to find him. Luckily, they found Jane Tuanan unconscious. When Jane Daquan saw Jane Tuanan, she kept calling him in a trembling voice, and tears gradually flowed down her face. Finally, he slowly opened his eyes and woke up, making Jane Daquan scared to death. When they arrived at the wooden house in the forest, Jane Daquan confided that perhaps she had returned to this place to have more time with her father. This was an opportunity for her to do things she hadn't done before. Lai Zi also honestly talked about what had happened at the Ice Sculpture Festival. He had discovered the true condition of his father. He was in a late stage of pancreatic cancer. Surgery was ineffective, and he could only temporarily control it with chemotherapy. He had worked very hard all his life for the happiness of his family. He was going to leave anytime soon. His concern was his two sons and his beloved wife. Muzi asked Lai Zi to spend more time with his mother and younger brother, Zahi, after he passed away. Not long after, Uncle Muzi was going to Shiyuan again to see the doctor. Lai Zi made up an excuse that he was busy in the factory and followed him out. When Muse was packing, he found a charm for peace in his suitcase. He knew that his wife must have known about his illness. She was just pretending not to know so that she could cooperate with his concealment. Zhang Daquan specifically went with Muse and Lai Zi to the hospital. Soon, the results of the examination came back. Muse's condition had deteriorated rapidly, and the cancer cells had spread. The doctor suggested that Li Zi inform his family so that they could prepare themselves. Lai Zi was uncomfortable inside, but he didn't dare show it in front of Muse. He lied to him, saying that as long as he continued treatment, the condition would improve. Muse felt that he was about to die this time, so he decided not to undergo chemotherapy and go home to stay with his beloved wife. It was New Year's Eve, and Zhang Daquan knew that Milan had a bad relationship with her father, so she invited her to come home with her to celebrate the new year. Uncle Zhonghui specially made his own specialty, snow pea cake, and gave Zhang Daquan and Milan each a piece to take home and share with their families. Zhang Daquan knew that Uncle Zhonghui lived alone, so she invited him to her house to celebrate with them, but he was used to being alone and would feel uncomfortable, so he refused. Yan Juns specifically went to the shop and invited Uncle Zhonghui home to celebrate the new year. Uncle Zhonghui couldn't believe it when he heard this for the first time. He quickly turned off the stove and went home with Yan Juns to celebrate the new year. Back home, Zhang Daquan's family's dinner table was filled with dishes cooked by Uncle Tuanan. She was determined to ease the relationship between her parents, and she praised Uncle Tuanan again and again. After thinking for a few days, Uncle Tuanan realized a few things. He was a person who was vain and liked to dream big. Whenever he had a little money, he would show it off, and when he spent it all, he would do stupid things. He hoped to break these bad habits in the new year. After dinner, Zhang Daquan picked up her mobile phone and asked everyone what they were doing. Lai Zi only suggested that they all set off fireworks together. Muse knew that his wife liked purple fireworks, so he had diligently made them. Lai Zi excitedly set off fireworks so that his mother could see clearly. But he didn't expect that the fireworks would misfire. Muse felt very disappointed when he thought that his time was running out and he probably wouldn't have a chance to watch fireworks with his wife next year. She had learned about Muse's illness and quickly comforted him, saying that there would be other opportunities. It was rare for everyone to be together today, so they decided to take some pictures. Yan Juns noticed that there seemed to be electricity running through Zhang Daquan's body, making her seem illusory. He looked closer and saw that Zhang Daquan was normal again in front of him. The next morning, when Zhang Daquan woke up early and brushed her teeth, she heard that the small planet 2022 TC4 was about to pass Earth on March 1st. She vaguely remembered that this was the day she traveled through time. Zhang Daquan's body seemed to have electricity running through it again, and the toothbrush in her hand fell to the ground. In the Starry Sky restaurant, everyone was busy cleaning up and preparing for the grand opening. Yan Juns also arrived. Zhang Daquan asked Liu Dashi about the power outage the last time. She immediately asked Yan Juns to take her to find out. Zhang Daquan confirmed that a fireball had indeed happened in Shiyuan, so he and Yan Juns went to confirm it. Yan Juns finally believed what Zhang Daquan said about her traveling through time. Meanwhile, Zahi went to the hospital and learned about his father's condition. He understood that Li Zi hadn't told him before because he was afraid that he would be worried. Soon after, Uncle Muse fainted in the hospital. At home, Lai Zi's mother had been waiting for her husband and son for a long time. She had a bad feeling in her heart, so she called Lai Zi. Lai Zi wanted to hide the fact that his father was in the hospital, but his mother directly asked which hospital they were at. When she learned that it was in Baihe Hospital, she immediately packed her luggage and went there. After emergency treatment, Uncle Muse's vital signs gradually stabilized, but he was still in a coma, and it was unknown if he would wake up. Zhang Daquan, after learning about this, rushed to the hospital with Yan Juns. Lai Zi was very sad. Although he had known about his father's illness for a long time, he still couldn't accept it. When Muse woke up, his wife and 2 sons were by his side. He knew that he couldn't hide his illness anymore, so he reached out to hold his wife's hand and wanted to go home. Muse was still thinking about purple fireworks. Lai Zi knew that he wanted to watch them with his mother, so he rushed out of the hospital and set off purple fireworks in front of the hospital room window. Muse's wish was fulfilled. He leaned into his wife's arms and slowly closed his eyes. That year, when Muse first joined the musical troupe, he gave everyone gifts from his hometown. Old Zheng sat there, staring blankly at his guitar, remembering the time when old Mo helped him fix it. He reminisced about his old friend and was overcome with grief, tears streaming down his face. When old Mo passed away, Lai Tzu's friends came to pay their respects and offer their condolences. Zhang Daquan was also heartbroken and hugged Li Tzu, who couldn't hold back his tears. Old Yan was equally distraught and speechless. Outside, Xai Laidlok wanted old Zheng's band to perform a song in memory of old Mo to ease everyone's sorrow. A melody filled the air, a final farewell that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Images of the three old friends in their youth flashed through their minds. With the loss of a family member, Li Tzu's family found their meals quiet and tasteless. Zheng Daquan knew they wouldn't have the appetite to eat, so she brought food over, but Tzu Xai told her that Li Tzu had gone out. Determined to find him, Zheng Daquan searched everywhere. Milan came to visit and saw Tzu Xai wanting to throw away the firecrackers that old Mo had bought. Milan took them out and lit them, believing that old Mo would be happy to see them. While searching for Li Tzu, Zheng Daquan saw the wallpaper on his phone. It was the picture she had wished for on her birthday. Overjoyed, she was even more determined to find him. Finally, Zheng Daquan found him sitting in a corner. She cried, telling him that she had found the love of her life. A man who stood by her and even set her picture as his phone's wallpaper. After so much hardship and joy, Li Tzu embraced Zheng Daquan. The next morning, the pair of doves publicly declared their love in front of Milan, making her happy for them. Yan Zhenz then stepped in to help his father. He told his father that he and his mother had filed for divorce at the Civil Affairs Bureau and that he would be leaving in a few days. Knowing his father was going to Guangzhou to work, Yan Zhenz wanted him to stay. Seeing his father's determination, Yan Zhenz hoped he could see him off. In another development, Zheng Daquan was surprised to see her father outside alone. She followed him and discovered he was heading to the band that had played at Li Tzu's father's funeral. Earlier, she had introduced her father to the band, but he had become angry. They couldn't believe he was the one keeping the rhythm for the band. Now, they were convinced that Zheng Yingzhen was a member of the band. When Zheng Daquan returned to her world, she wondered if Zheng Yingzhen was her real father, seeing that he was still alive. She decided to support him unconditionally because she just wanted to see him happy. That night, Zheng Daquan told her mother about her father's new job. Zheng Yingzhen had tried to keep it a secret, but he couldn't when his daughter blurted it out. When his wife found out that he was playing funeral and wedding music, she was furious and left. Zheng Daquan had just wanted her mother to be happy, but her words made things worse. Zheng Yingzhen wanted to leave the best impression on his wife before he left, but he couldn't. Zheng Daquan hoped he wouldn't feel down, because his job was a respectable way to make money. With old Mo gone, old Zheng felt like he had lost a pillar of support. He had to live well so that old Mo and Zheng Daquan could feel at ease about him. Understanding what her father was thinking, Zheng Daquan decided to take care of her mother for him. The next morning, Zheng Daquan took her mother to watch her father practice at work. He was the conductor, leading the rhythm for everyone. This reminded her mother of their first encounter. Back then, he was trying to join the band but was harshly criticized by the conductor. But she thought he played beautifully and defended him. When she returned home, she changed her mind completely and bought her husband a new suit for his performances. In the evening, Li Zi returned home and found his mother still reminiscing about his father, talking about his habits. When he brought milk to Zahi, he noticed his brother was still downcast and had given up on the upcoming competition in Beijing. Li Zi wanted him to reconsider, but Zahi refused to think about it further. The following morning, Li Zi went to the shop to find Zheng Daquan. He wanted to give her a gift, but suddenly, her aura flickered, causing both of them to be disbelieving. Just then, Milan entered, breaking the silence between them. Li Zi explained that Zahi didn't want to go to Beijing for the competition and wanted Milan to persuade his brother. When Milan left, Zheng Daquan revealed that she had disappeared earlier and it happened occasionally. Yan Zhenz had also witnessed this before. He believed it was a phenomenon called fireball. The closer the fireball appeared, the more unstable Zheng Daquan would become. Li Zi mentioned that the fireball was the reason for the time-space exchange. On their way back, he had seen it and deliberately crushed into himself. Later, they both went to see Yan Zhenz, but neither wanted to reveal their secret to anyone else. Yan Zhenz had already determined the time of the fireball's appearance, early morning on March 1st, which was also the time they would return. Even though they had only known each other for a few months, Yan Zhenz felt saddened at the thought of their departure from this world. During the new year, they took a group photo. Yan Zhenz had witnessed Zheng Daquan disappearing for a few seconds with his own eyes. Hearing this, Li Zi urged them to pay attention to any such occurrences with him, because they would have to leave. They had announced the recruitment of a chef. They wanted to find out what was said in the phone call Zheng Daquan received at the Yuan railway station, so they decided to go there to investigate. Meanwhile, Milan went to see Zahi and encouraged him to continue the Beijing competition to achieve his dream. However, the loss of his father had made Zahi lose interest, and he abandoned all his months of hard work. Milan collected all his drawings, not wanting him to give up halfway. At the same time, the old couple went to the railway station wanting to call Zhang Daquan in the other world, using a frequency modulation phone to hear what she said. However, Li Zi had forgotten his phone in the car and went back to get it. While they were waiting, Zhang Daquan received a call from her own phone in the other world. When the time for the fireball arrived, they had to board the K268 train to return to their own time-space. But in this time-space, that train had ceased operation. Zhang Daquan needed to find it. Zhang Daquan from the other world mentioned that Li Zi in that world had passed away in an accident a few months ago. This news deeply saddened Zhang Daquan, and she didn't dare tell the truth to Li Zi. She only mentioned the time they would return on the K268 train. On their way back, Li Zi wondered about his life in the other world, but Zhang Daquan hesitated, unsure of how to answer. That evening, Mu Zili returned home and couldn't find his mother, so he asked everyone to help find her. Thanks to Liu Dashi, they found Ms. Tu at Mr. Mu's fireworks factory. Witnessing Ms. Tu rambling about Mr. Mu due to her grief, Zhang Daquan couldn't hold back her tears. The next morning, Zhang Daquan told Yan Juns about receiving a call from her own self in the other time-space yesterday. The other Zhang Daquan had informed her of the time they could return, but Li Zi could not because he had died in that time-space. She had also understood the recent phenomenon she was experiencing. If the two Zhang Daquan from different time-spaces met, they would both likely disappear. Zhang Daquan hadn't told Li Zi yet because if he left, she wouldn't know what would happen to Ms. Tu and Zahi. Zhang Daquan walked outside, feeling sad, but everywhere she went, she saw images of herself and everyone else happily living in this world. She went to find Li Zi wanting to tell him the truth, but when she learned that Ms. Tu's condition was getting worse, Zhang Daquan couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth. When she returned home, the elderly couple were preparing for their trip. Although she saw her parents becoming closer, Zhang Daquan didn't feel happy. Her mother noticed this and talked to her daughter. Zhang Daquan wanted to know what would happen if she disappeared from this world. Knowing her mother's answer, "I will spend the rest of my life searching for you," made Zhang Daquan wonder if she should return. After taking his mother to the doctor, Li Zi was told that her brain was still normal. Her symptoms were just due to the loss of a loved one, which made her a bit sad. If it continued for another month, she might develop mental illness. That evening, Li Zi went to find Zhang Daquan, and they both went to the convenience store to buy Whisper of Spring. They reminisced about Zhang Daquan's birthday last year when they had embraced each other. This year, Zhang Daquan didn't know how to celebrate her birthday, but they had to return home afterwards. This saddened Li Zi, so he hoped his mother would recover before he left. If Zhang Daquan wanted to stay in this world, Li Zi would agree to stay with her. Although they wished it could be that way, it was impossible. It wouldn't be fair to their counterparts in other time spaces. He didn't want to take over Li Zi's life in this world either. The next morning, Yan Juns came to see Zhang Daquan. She told him she would tell Li Zi the truth so he could make a decision, because when they returned, they would be from two different worlds. Yan Juns thanked Zhang Daquan because it was thanks to her that everything had changed in this world and everyone had benefited. That evening, the whole family had dinner together. They felt a true void without old Mu, the rice-powered loudspeaker. Old Yan wanted to raise a toast to everyone because it was time for him to leave. This made everyone even more sad. But they all raised their glasses to wish him good health. On their way back, Zhang Daquan told Li Zi that the Zhang Daquan in the other time-space had informed her that Li Zi in that world was no longer there. That was the reason why Zhang Daquan was experiencing the phenomenon while Li Zi wasn't. If he decided to return, Li Zi in this time-space would completely disappear. This made Li Zi feel conflicted and he walked away. He went back home with a heavy heart, unsure of how to make the right decision. Those words kept replaying in his mind. The next morning, Li Zi saw his mother constantly reminiscing about his father, and he couldn't bear to leave. At the same time, Zhang Daquan talked to her mother before they left for their trip. Because they had already booked their flight, they couldn't stay home to celebrate her birthday. Zhang Daquan cried sadly, not because they had forgotten her birthday, but because when they returned, she would have left this time-space. In a different development, Zahi went to see a master fortune teller and decided to go to Beijing to take the exam, pursuing his dream. At Yuan railway station, old Yan told Yan Juns to take good care of his mother when he was gone. Having nothing to give him, he gave him a card. He also sent some food for him to eat on the road. This time of separation, Yan Juns couldn't hold back his tears and hoped his father would visit often. When old Yan boarded the train, he also cried like a child leaving home for the first time. That night, everyone was downcast except for Milan. Li Zi said he wouldn't leave, seeing his mother and brother so devastated. Zhang Daquan, seeing this, also wanted to stay in this time-space, but Li Zi disagreed because the other Zhang Daquan needed to return. Outside, Zahi went to thank Milan for encouraging him earlier. He asked her to paint a picture of the four of them, but seeing the gloomy faces of the other three, Zahi didn't know how to paint them. The next morning, Jang Daquan saw her parents off for their trip, tears welling up in her eyes. She hoped they would be happy together in the future. Afterwards, Lizzie brought the painting Zahi had made of the four of them to Jang Daquan. Although today was her birthday, she was still sad because she would have to leave after today. To change the mood, Lizzie took Jang Daquan to a place where he danced and sang in the snow to make her laugh. When Jang Daquan approached, they played snowball fights together. Afterwards, they lay down together, whispering to each other. They missed each other this time, and would have to wait until the fireball appeared again for Lizzie to return, by which time they would be 80 years old. But they weren't sad because of this. They still imagined the life of the old couple together. Lizzie gave Jang Daquan a string as a birthday gift, seeing it as their red string of fate. But she cut it and wrapped it around her finger like a wedding ring, promising to wait for his return. Then they kissed and spent a passionate night together. At Yuan railway station, Jang Daquan couldn't bear to leave Lizzie and tears fell. But the fireball appeared and the K268 train arrived. In this moment, they were speechless, unable to utter a word. Before boarding the train, Jang Daquan ran back and hugged Lizzie tightly. When the train left, it quickly vanished, leaving Lizzie behind in this world. Back in her own time-space, Milan was still waiting for Jang Daquan, unable to contact her. During the time Jang Daquan was in the other time-space, Milan had been living with that Jang Daquan. Milan felt that Jang Daquan had been acting very strange recently, but she hadn't told her what had happened. Jang Daquan didn't want them to continue talking and sent Milan back to her husband's house. That evening, Jang Daquan was still sad and looked into the distance. The next day, Yan Juns came to check on her about her recent state. Jang Daquan told him about the existence of the other time-space, where Lizzie was still alive. Therefore, Jang Daquan would continue to wait until the day Lizzie returned. Yan Juns thought that Jang Daquan was a bit unstable because of Lizzie's sudden departure, so he didn't say anything to her. But in the following days, Jang Daquan went to Yuan railway station every day to wait for Lizzie's return. When she visited Lizzie's parents, Jang Daquan happily embraced old Mu, who was still alive, causing his wife and him to be very surprised. Zahi in this time-space was still studying hard to prepare for the exam, not at all disheartened or depressed. Afterwards, they all took a group photo together. While watching a project, Jang Daquan saw a familiar figure and quickly ran down. But when she got there, it was gone, making her feel a bit let down. But when she went to the lighthouse, Lizzie suddenly appeared behind her, fulfilling their promise. In the other time-space, Yan Juns and Jang Daquan got married and had a child. Even more surprising, Zahi and Milan also became a couple. They continued to live happily even though Lizzie wasn't there,